Okay, so welcome to the Heroes Lecture Part 2, version 7. Keep making this thing better. Hopefully it's getting better. And last time on Part 1, we talked about this amazing phenomenon called the hero story. It was pretty much coined by this guy, single guy, this one guy named Joseph Campbell. I don't know if I think he was married with kids probably. Joseph Campbell, and he ever since he was a boy, he read about mythology and he identified a common thread amongst them all, and it was pretty intricate. I'm going through his book right now, and he calls it mankind's one great story. That there's basically one mythology that runs through all the cultures and epochs and all the varieties of human existence all seem to tell a very similar story, and this is the hero story. And we talked about how that story, as ancient and as mystical as it is told today. It's woven all throughout our culture. It drives sales. People make money on this thing because we can't keep our eyes off of it. Whatever gets our attention seems to get monetized these days, and the hero story definitely continues to get our attention. And I said, why does it get our attention? What does it mean that this story exists on all levels of culture, at all periods in time? I think we're so enthralled by it because we instinctively know that this story is our story. That there is, as we've always suspected, you might say, a grand narrative. I think we've maybe in our cynical moments, we have pushed that idea away of a grand narrative, but we all want to be part of this great story, a prophecy written of old, right? So we have this story that seems to be woven throughout multiple cultures, one that's told in our own culture through sports, movies, music, basically any cultural product, cultural phenomenon. And I believe that's because this is our story, that somehow there's a destiny woven throughout reality even, that perhaps the shape of the universe, the shape of reality is directional. And it's this pattern that takes the form of a story, and maybe it's a pattern in time, and that we have to follow in the footsteps of this pattern. We need to be harmonious with this pattern in order to unlock the fullness of who we are. I mean, a crazy idea. Very mystical, right? And so you're probably thinking, okay, I mean, that's, Steve, so Star Wars and Dune are kind of similar. That doesn't mean that it's my destiny, that it's the destiny of mankind. That's kind of a jump, don't you think? Well, fair enough. How do we know if it's true? How do we know if it's not just some coincidence or some artificial imposition that we place upon the universe that simply isn't there, just an imposition on it? Well, one criteria for determining if something is, shall we say, real, is if it exists on multiple levels of analysis. And nowadays we seem to put a premium on the scientific analysis, on the language of science, because it seems to be the most impartial, the most unbiased, and maybe that's true. Maybe there's something to be said about that. And it's certainly got us a lot of things. I mean, look at this computer and this camera and all this stuff. And so, if it is our destiny, as I'm trying to put forward here, Steve, if it is what we were meant to fulfill, this was the path that we were meant to take, I mean, shouldn't there be some other levels of evidence of this? Shouldn't we see that perhaps? How about in our physiology? Shouldn't the science show it somewhere? I'm glad you asked. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How do we see the hero story in our scientific reality? And I want to focus on our physiology because my thesis is basically that we were destined. The hero story is our destiny. Do we see that in our physiology? And you might know the answer to that, of my opinion, but let's take an exploration. Let's take that journey. So, okay, let's talk about it. Is it in our physiology? Well, what do you mean by our physiology? Well, the hero story is generally it's a narrative, it's a path, it's a sequence of actions basically. And you could say that survival is kind of like our destiny, like the thing that links all of our physiology together, that unites all these very complex parts and different mechanisms, is that it's all been designed, you could say, or evolved to survive, right? I mean, how do we survive? How do we adapt to the changes coming in from the future? How do we adapt to the environment around us that's constantly changing, and we're constantly changing, right? What does that adaptive process look like? You could say that is the key process that has been designed and honed by whatever mechanism, conscious or not, that you want to put on there, that's been designed to do. We've been designed to survive and to propagate forward. So how do we do that? Well, basically, we do that through actions, right? That we need to identify the things that we need to have to survive, and then to find ways of obtaining that, and to acquire skills or information that will allow us to obtain the things that we need, the things that we desire. And so you could say that our ability to survive is our ability to coordinate ourselves to the world, the changing thing that is ourselves, and coordinate that to the changing thing that is the world, and then to find ways to move through the world such that we can successfully, really not just survive, but prosper into the future, right? What is that mechanism? How does that work? So what is our primary survival mechanism? What does that look like? How do we adapt to the world and also to the future? Well, okay. From that perspective, you could say our physiology is divided into two parts. We can break it down into basically a duality. And this isn't just any duality. This is the duality of the universe, you could say. It's a duality that has been written about through stories and movies. It's a plot of countless movies, countless pieces of literature. It's the subject matter of religions and psychology and all manner of study. And it's one that you're very, very familiar with. Mind, body. It's as simple as that duality. And the coordination of those two things is what largely determines our success in the world. So mind and body, right? Head over heart. You could think of like emotions versus thinking, right? Your intentions versus your urgings. You could think yin yang, you could think masculine, feminine, order, chaos. But what we're going to focus on is we're going to look at the more technical aspect of it. And so when we're talking about mind versus body, I think you could sort of say that it's basically voluntary versus involuntary. Deliberate versus instinctual versus automatic. Action versus reaction, right? So, okay, let's mind, body. Now, when we're talking about the mind, what we're talking about is a specific part of the mind. We're just talking about the parts of the brain that you control. Like not the amygdala or the fight or flight. A lot of those things are just impulses that rise up that you have to deal with. But what's the thing that deals with it? Well, our conscious awareness is largely located in the prefrontal cortex. That's this frontal lobe of the brain. And if we want to get really specific, the part that really steers the ship, that kind of pulls all the strings, shall we say, is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Okay. Now, this is a very small part of your physiology. So we're, just to emphasize, we're talking about the brain, which is a small part, and then a specific part, the frontal lobes, and then the prefrontal cortex, and now this dorsolateral. We've isolated it down to this one key area that really kind of centralizes a lot of the functions happening both in your brain and then also throughout your physiology. So this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, what does this thing do? Well, they call it a planning center. Now, I know what you're thinking. Planning center, that's cool, man. Yeah, man, I make plans all the time. Yeah, I'm going to go to that party next week with my friend. We got plans to go. I got plans with this girl I'm going to see. Like, those are plans, but that's not exactly what they're talking about. This is a technical term. A plan is anything deliberate that you do, okay? Like, okay, that was a plan. I just executed a plan. My plan was to demonstrate to you that I can execute a plan, I guess. It was... So, getting a drink of water is a plan. I mean, if you really break that down, that shit is complicated. I mean, first of all, you had to identify that it was water that you needed. Okay, so we're gonna go through all that, but like, it's very, very complex. When you were 2 years old, getting a drink of water was no small matter. Knowing that you needed water was no small matter when you were 2. Okay, so the planning center, right? This is the thing. Any deliberate action occurs in this left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is the guy that steers the ship. This little piece, just like a big ship, small rudder, right? This is the rudder in the ship. Now, you could also think of it like the pilot in a cockpit, right? So this is the guy who controls all the levers, but he's in front of a dashboard, instrumentation panel, where he gets readouts, data on all sorts of things. Information on the airplane, information on the outside world, and that's same as the dorsolateral. It gets information on your physiology, specifically your heart, your lungs, and your stomach. These 3 areas, right? Those are what you're consciously aware of. I don't really know what's happening with my blood pressure. I don't know what my liver's doing. I don't even know what my liver does, to be honest. But it works. I don't necessarily know how I'm moving my hands, but I'm steering my hands, right? And so the dorsolateral has, it kind of represents, or it's aware of all the conscious information that's in your body. The autonomic system, those 3 centers, heart, lungs, and stomach being kind of the most primary. And then it's also aware of your 5 senses. In my case, I have 6, but some of you, most of you probably have 5. So your 5 senses, and all these things are feeding into your dorsolateral. So it's this, right, it's kind of this signal receiver, and then it's the signal interpreter, right? Because it has to transform all these signals into some kind of coherent plan. So how does it do that exactly? Well, they have another term for the dorsolateral, and that's called a flexible rule-setting device. Flexible rule-setting device. And again, we got to be really careful about these names. I'll give you an example. There's something called the Stroop task. And this is an experiment done where they had people sit down and read off flashcards. And we're just going to summarize this experiment. They're reading off these flashcards, really simple words like house, boat, cat, dog, whatever. And then like halfway through, they tell them, okay, you know what, don't read the words. I want you to tell me the color that the words are written in, because they're all written in different fonts. And so they're like reading the words, and then they kind of slow down, right? There's always a slowdown. And then they go, okay, red, blue, yellow, purple, and they speed back up as they get used to the new rule. Now that slowdown, what's happening there, and they know this now, what's happening is that the dorsolateral is sending signals back down to your autonomic system. It's calming everything down, because I think it needs to be calm in order to reorchestrate your physiology to now follow that new rule. The first rule is reading the words. The second rule is telling me the colors, right? That's a rule change, a flexible rule setting device. Now let's think about that flexible rule setting device. I want you to think of this dorsolateral as a big fucking computer, okay? This is a super computer. And each rule is kind of like a 0 and a 1, right? Like you could say a computer is just a machine that reads off zeros and ones, right? The binary code. No, that's all it does. It's just a bunch of zeros and ones. Pretty simple, right? No. Actually, no. Computers read off a million zeros and ones and are capable of immense complexity, and they can achieve all sorts of very complex tasks. The dorsolateral is the exact same way. It's taking all these signals, right? Massive amounts of sensory data, including your emotions and your desires. That's actually probably the central part of it. And it's encoding them into actionable information. So in terms of like the outside world, it takes all these different rules. Now, you could think of rules as there's kind of 2 different kinds of rules, right? Now, there's a command rule, which is like I must get something to eat, or I'm thirsty, I want something to drink, or I want to buy a book, right? These different rules, motivations. But then there are also like descriptor rules, like describing the state of things or the nature, the character of things. So if you were like a computer programmer, right? We'll go back to this computer example. If you were a computer programmer and you're building out like a gaming world for someone to play in, well, you have to describe every aspect of the world. You have to code in like the color of the sky, the ground. You have to code in the physics of the world. Everything has to be encoded into a rule set such that someone knows how to move through the world. And so the dorsolateral is kind of the same mechanism. The dorsolateral is able to incorporate multiple sensory data, translate those into a kind of like a rule, and then combine those rules into like a textured, coherent, unified structure, such that you can now successfully move through the world, right? It's able to understand what space is, and it utilizes the visual cortex to delineate visual objects, visual forms, because that helps you do what? It helps you move through the world in order to obtain the things that you want. All right, so this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex really is the key. It's in the information center, right? It also has access to your memories too. I forgot to say that. It just has access to all these different things. It codes out, right? It builds out this world, this data that's according to your senses. So it is, admittedly an approximation. It's a model, right? And it's able to build out also your physiology. You have an internal representation of where your body is, and you don't always know where that is. That's why we have doctors, right? Like my shoulder hurts. I don't really know why. Like, I got to go see a doctor to figure that out because I'm not totally aware. But I am aware of the signals that are coming from my shoulder, right? So these are internal representations of the world and of yourself. It builds out these models. It's also an internal representation of your desires, your needs, your motivations. And that's interesting because you really had to figure that out. Like when you were 2 years old and you were thirsty, it wasn't like it announced itself like, I'm thirsty, get some water. Like it's just a sensation. It's basically a discomfort or a pain, and then you started crying, and then your mom goes, what does she do? Like, oh, do you want applesauce? Like, she tries to hug you, she puts you on the swing, she's feeding you, she's trying to figure out what the hell it is that you want, and then eventually you get the thing that you want, and your brain starts to go, oh, okay, now I know. That feeling means I'm thirsty for water. Okay, so it's a mapping device. It's almost like a treasure map, because it's scanning the world to match desires with goals, and then there's also a tactical map because it's trying to facilitate the acquisition of whatever it is that you're trying to get, right? Okay, right? So this is the mind, right? This is all conscious. This is all voluntary. This is you. This is how you make plans. So that's the voluntary mind. Flexible rule setting device, your planning center, signal interpreter. What about the body? Well, the body's kind of the exact opposite, right? The dorsolateral receives the signals, interprets the signals, does amazing things with the signal, but it's not really a signal generator. What's the signal generator? The body, right? All the senses, all the signals that are being sent from different parts of your body, all the emotions and instincts that you have built up, all your memories, that's the signal generator. And it's as sophisticated, maybe even more impressive, I don't know, as a dorsolateral. The type of signal that it sends is so refined. We're able to tease out such subtlety in how we feel. That's why we have such rich literature and why we can take in such wonderful sights and sounds and vistas and put them together into these amazing compositions, right? We can see it compositionally. Even take, for example, color. Our eyes, we can see a million colors. I Googled this the other day. We can actually see a million, literally a million. I mean, take, for example, even gray, like kind of a boring color. Like, how many shades of gray can we see? I mean, it's something like 50. It's at least 50, right? At least. So anyways, we have massive sophistication and differentiation of the signal generated that can be detected by this dorsolateral and then translated into very sophisticated models and plans. But one thing that the body can't do very well is it can't implement very sophisticated rules. It has a very basic rule set. And basically the dorsolateral, the prefrontal is sort of built out on the motor cortex, and it generally, on a low level, it understands plans in terms of movement. And actually at an abstract level, it's able to take movement to very, very abstract places. For example, to get a job is kind of like forward movement, but you're not actually forwardly moving, but we associate the acquisition as forwardly moving. But on a primitive level or a basic level, the body's only capable of that, of a low level of abstraction. It really comes down to like fight or flight. Do you want to move forward? Are you ready for action? Are you tired, standing still? Or are you frightened and you want to run away? That's kind of, and an example of that is if I were to suppress your prefrontal cortex, right, this very sophisticated rule setting device, if I were to dampen that ability, then you're basically just left with your motor cortex. And your motor cortex is able to execute strings of commands that have been stored up. Like it can do strings of commands, but it's not really like I'll give you an example. So if I were to give you a gun and I shut down your prefrontal, you're still able, and actually you're probably more able to accomplish physical tasks because you're not really bogged down with the qualifying refinement of the task. Like for example, like I give you the gun, I shut down your prefrontal, and I go shoot those targets. Like a machine, you're just gonna do. Like you're gonna have incredible accuracy, great physical performance, speed, efficiency. But one thing I can't do, I can't go, you know what? I only want you to shoot the yellow targets, not the red targets. Because that's kind of like an abstract rule. And you can't implement that. It doesn't make sense. You're like, what? And then you just shoot everything. So your body is this incredibly performative reaction sensing machine, but very, very primitive in terms of its ability to apply multiple abstract concepts. So for example, like if you're driving down the street and someone cuts you off, right? The signals are very fast. Like your body's the first thing to react, and it's non-linguistic, right? It's just these signals that come up. Someone cuts you off, for whatever reason, we just become enraged. And that's kind of a forward-moving aggression, very blunt, kind of low-resolution signal. If you manifest what the signal is implying, like your body is just telling you to attack, essentially. Like the signal is attack, and you just have this sensation, and then you just move forward with it without really applying qualifying rule sets that might take into account other factors that you would find important if you only take the time to consider it, right? The prefrontal takes time. That's one of the main lessons of coordination of our physiology, is that just like with the Stroop task, that when new rules come into play, it has to pause. It sends a calming signal, right? It actually slows down your autonomic, your heart, your lungs, and your stomach. It calms everything down such that you can now access different contextualized rules that might prioritize a different action sequence. So when you have road rage, maybe you have this outburst of emotion, and then most people, they just go, man, I can't believe that guy. Like, all right, well, whatever, it's fine. Like, I just need to get to work or whatever. You start applying different priorities, different context-dependent rules that might be more to your benefit in the long run. So a lot of how we survive, how we adapt, is our ability to access the rule-setting device. Now, on the other hand, you need to be able to access your signals too. And it's kind of like this seesaw of we tend to be good at one thing or the other. Like a 2-year-old is an amazing signal receiver, just every signal is the right move. I'm mad, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I like this, I want that, I want to put that in my mouth, I want to drink this, I want to, and your mom's sitting there going, oh my God, like don't run into the street and, no, share your toys. And so 2-year-olds can't adapt to the world because there's no centralizing command that's able to prioritize and contextualize all these different signals. They're unable to survive without their parents. Whereas you could think of someone who's like a really stiff accountant and he's totally shut down all his signals. And now he's kind of lost his ability to fill his desires and to adapt to whatever the future's holding for him, So you got these. So basically, it's this coordinative dance between these two structures, these two devices, loosely termed as the mind, the dorsolateral, prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral, and then all these automatic involuntary systems that manifest themselves in a non-linguistic way. And so, what does this coordination look like? How does this work? Let's get into it just a little bit more. Let's do an example. Let's take you through a little bit of a drill here. I want you to pretend that you're in a restaurant, okay? And you're looking at this menu. So let's sit down at a restaurant. Now, when you're in a restaurant, you have a very basic rule that's kind of like a goal. They call it a goal state, because it's a state of being. But anyways, it's like a rule. And the rule is we're hungry, we need something to eat. That's the most basic rule. But that's a very generalizing rule. It's a very low resolution rule. What we really want to do is probably try to find the most beneficial thing to eat. That's what we're trying to do here, right? And so to do that, we actually need to coordinate these two systems. And so when we sit down at a restaurant, what do? We take a look at the menu. What we're trying to understand is what is the condition of the world? What are the rules of this new world that we're sitting in? Given that we're not going to switch to a new restaurant. Now, once we look at the menu, we might decide to switch to a new restaurant, but let's say we're looking at this menu, and we go, okay, these are the options, right? And what happens when you look at a menu? I mean, next time you're at a restaurant, really pay attention to your physiology. What happens? There's a quietness that comes over you. You're looking at the menu, and you kind of just disappear from the world in some sense. You enter into this really awesome meditative state, the calming signal, right? Because these menu items represent a brand new rule set, right? What are the conditions of this world? What is the sum total of options within this world, possibilities within this given domain, right? It's a brand new set of rules. Like the rules to a board game. Like the board game, the object of the game is to find the most satiating item, and the rules are you have to choose from this menu of item. You also have to do that within basically a given time frame. So you're dealing with limited resources. There's all these levels of rules that you will need to consider as you're looking at this menu. Now, you've done it so much that you don't really think about it anymore. But the first thing you do is you're looking at it, and what are you doing? You're scanning, you're map building. And you're map building, you're gathering information, and then you're scanning for a signal. It's a non-linguistic signal, right? It's just like when you're a baby, I'm thirsty. That's kind of what you're doing here. We're looking at these pieces of information, and because we've eaten food before, these pieces of information through our hippocampus, our memory, it triggers a signal for us. And, each of us, we've been eating food for a while, presumably, and we go to restaurants for a while, and so we already have kind of this internal sense. We already have a developed neural structure for what we will find rewarding, and that could be a combination of satiating or beneficial. So as we're scanning, we're just getting a signal. Swordfish frites. I'm just going to do this in real time here. Dinner bar lettuces? No. Or diner bar lettuces? Not really. Beet salad? Maybe. So I'm just, right, this is kind of this very intricate process where I have tons of memory data to draw from here. Lots of experience doing this. And so all these items are sending me highly texturized signals to me, and they're giving me different levels of satisfaction. Now, these, of course, are models of satisfaction, models of satiation. Pork schnitzel sounds good. Chicken country captain, maybe not. See, curry, right? So here's what happens, right? We're developing this treasure map of desire, this desire map, and chicken country captain, maybe. And then what do? It's kind of a blunt signal, sounds kind of good. I need to sharpen the signal. I need to gather more information. I need to understand what I'm getting into here, because there's might be more rules here that I'm not aware of. One rule is the price. They're all pretty much similarly, whoa, this is a no, we're not doing this, right? So that is an abstract rule that I'm placing on. And this is a time frame preference, right? So this might be the most satiating, delicious thing on the menu that will be the most pleasurable to eat in the moment, but the pain from my bank account, the loss to my bank account is going to be too high, and that combination of pleasure and pain is going to be a no-go for me. I think I can find a more uh, overall satiating and rewarding item to get. So I would lose the game if I bought this one. Um, this is maybe too rich, right? I'm applying all these different rule sets because I don't want to have any regret later on. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to get something too rich and then my stomach's not happy with me. So I have kind of a longer time frame preference. I'm not so worried about calories. I could probably use more calories to be honest because I would like to build some more muscle, and I don't really want to have any gluten if I can go low gluten, right? So all these abstract rule sets are being applied, and I have a weight on all of them, but it's a discovery process because in this moment, I'm not exactly sure what weight I'm going to put on different things. Like if this was 3 in the morning, then now my treasure map looks a lot different, right? My preference map. So this is a discovery process. We're in real time, kind of improvisationally dealing with the future and trying to model out the future. We're predicting the future here. And as I scan these items, in some small sense, like in a very efficient way, I'm tasting or projecting the taste of each of these items. Turnip cakes. Wow, that sounds fucking crazy. Okay, so let's say you're scanning this menu, and I think what I'll do. I just had rice. Oh man, this is tough. I would, well, Neo strips too. Swordfish frites. I am afraid of the caper raisin sauce, but I think I'm gonna go for it. It's kind of pricey. You know what? Fuck it, let's go. Let's just do it. Today, I'm gonna put a lower value on this. I'm hoping that I'm not gonna regret that later. So again, I'm just predictively modeling out. I'm taking a risk. I'm taking my best guess here. I have limited information. I can't fully predict my state, my state of satisfaction in the future when I look at my bank account and go, oh, damn it, at $42, I see that show up in my bank statement. So, okay, so I'm going to decide on these swordfish frites. And so I really had to coordinate this map of the world, right? Swordfish frites. I'm just guessing that it'll probably come out pretty clean. I'm using other contextualized rules to try to tease out, try to predict, right? This menu, it looks pretty good. Like it's not messy. It doesn't look like a Denny's or anything. It looks like a pretty nice diner, but kind of maybe a little bit high end, just judging from like they have bacon jam here, right? Bacon jam, sour cream. So I think they can pull off these swordfish frites. I think I'm predicting that maybe I'll win the game here. I'm going to have a pretty high level of reward from the swordfish, especially compared to other items. Another thing I can't really do, I can't just order every item on the menu and then taste each one and then decide, right? There's just so many reasons why I can't do it, but the main reason is I'm limited. I have limited time, limited resources, limited ability to sample each future. I have to envision the future, predictively model out. And this is my dorsal lateral working in overtime, really just absorbing all these different rules. Now, the pathing to get the swordfish frites is actually pretty simple. I've done it a million times. I know I'm not really too worried about how to obtain the swordfish frites. What'll happen is I'll just signal the waiter, or maybe I'll try to maintain my social status and politely wait for the waiter such that I don't lose social value, because that's also a goal and a rule. So that's a contextualizing rule, that order something from the menu but don't embarrass yourself, right? So the waiter comes over and he says, how's it going? And are you ready to order? I say, yeah. And he goes, what do you want? I go, I would like the swordfish frites. So I execute that action, and that's really an action sequence. It's almost an automatic. It's like a little string. It's a command string. I would like the swordfish frites. Oh, great. Okay. Excellent. And he goes off, and presumably he tells the kitchen, and now I eagerly wait in anticipation. It should be noted that now that I've ordered, I'm more able to visualize. Like, because my anticipation's higher, I'm more able to visualize and get excited about and nervous about how these swordfish frites will come out. Like, ooh, I'm excited. Like, I wonder what this caper raisin sauce will be. Right now that it's a reality, it's in some sense I can't retract it. I've chosen my future. I'm committed now, and I nervously await with anticipation what this future will bring me. And then I'll eat the food, and then we'll figure out if I won the game or not. You know, if I was really happy with it, if it was worth the extra money, and basically my ability to coordinate these two systems and model out what I think the future will be basically determines my reward. Now, sometimes you get lucky and you you pick the exact right thing, just maybe by chance, maybe, you know, or sometimes you get really unlucky. Now, let's say, for example, the waiter comes back and he goes, "Sir, I'm so sorry, but the kitchen just informed me that we're out of swordfish frites." And he hands me the menu again, and okay, so what happens? What is that? That's a new rule. That's a rule change, and that's a significant rule change. What's happened? The future of my swordfish frites has now just been destroyed, right? Because in some ways it's like I have built out this neurology. I've prepared and coordinated my system around the acquisition of swordfish frites. I have anticipated the collection of a reward, the protein, the good flavor. I guess those are the main things about food, right? Like how good it tastes and how good it'll be for me, the enjoyment of the meal. I've built out this future, and now this guy's telling me this future can no longer be, right? And so what does that cause? That causes pain, because now this future has to die. It's a rage response, and the inner 2-year-old in me experiences all these different emotions, these sensations. But what's happening is that now that this future has been destroyed, this you could call it a narrative. This future is now gone, and all the physiology that was built out to receive that future is kind of dangling. I can no longer depend on this future. And so what I instinctively do then is apply towards a higher goal set. And that is, well, that's okay. I can order something else, right? I'm not going to starve. So this is not a life or death situation. So now I'm limiting the threat of this future that can no longer be. And I'm applying towards higher rule sets. We're trying to apply different rules that will help mitigate the instinctual emotions that I feel, because again, a larger goal is the maintenance of my social reputation. That if I just flop on the ground and start crying and screaming and kicking my legs and I want the swordfish, and right, that would be devastating to my social reputation. And if I'm sitting with a friend, you know, that person may not be friends with me again. I'm going to lose a friend. You know, it's this really, and also it's like, that's just fucked up. Like my goals around my relationship with myself supersede that very, very momentary release of those instinctual emotions, right? So again, it's this coordinative dance. It's my ability to access multiple rule sets, contextualizing rule sets, my ability to map out different worlds, try to predictively map out my physiology that allows me to successfully complete this game, which is finding the most satiating item. Now you can imagine playing this game. You can imagine playing this game on a much higher level, like buying a new house, or should I marry this woman? You know, should I marry this man? Sadly, you cannot marry each man on the planet, see how it goes, and then pick one. You just can't do it. You have to predictively model that out. You have to engage with the future with limited information, and that's life. That's just how it works. And your ability to do that, and your ability to withstand sudden rule changes, right? Some rule changes are devastating. Sudden divorce, someone dies, right? A loss of a job. These are rule changes. Your ability to appeal to higher rule sets to stabilize, because again, that physiology gets torn out and now needs to center itself around a narrative or a future that's intact. So this coordinated dance is celebrated for a reason, because this is the key coordination, this order and chaos, or head, heart, whatever. How you engage, coordinate map out the rules, coordinate the rules with the world, and then coordinate the acquisition of that rule, right? You're having to path out how to acquire. All of that is basically your ability to survive and adapt to the future, because this is all predictive modeling. Now, you may have guessed, but there's a very, 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 very simple way of describing what we just went through. All this whole crazy, long, complicated explanation can be summarized in a single word. What do you think that word is? What do you think it is? Story. That's it. I've just described to you that we tell stories. Running a model is telling a story. You're running a little movie reel of you eating the swordfish, of you eating, right, all these different menu items, right? Eating this pork schnitzel, eating the New York strip, it's too rich. Turnip cakes, no, I don't think so, right? It's just like an impression, but that's kind of like it's a little movie reel that you put in, that you roll through. Like, if I'm telling you, remodel out the world, right? Model out a representation of yourself, and then model out your desires, and then model out you performing different action sequences to try to acquire that target. This is the world, this is you moving through the world, this is your motivation. What is that? That's a story. That's a story. That is, by definition, a story. And so what does that mean? It means that in the very center of our physiology, the exact mechanism with which we adapt to the world and determine our future, our destinies, you could say, determine our fate, how we make decisions, how we coordinate ourselves physically, but then also, you could say, morally, right? How do we coordinate our values with the world such that we have the correct target identification? We tell ourselves stories. And we keep practicing storytelling. We keep listening to stories because we're trying to update our maps. The map of the world, the map of your physiology, the map of your desires. What will satiate my desires? Signal identification, and then signal, and then what would you call that? Signal match. Target identification. Signal identification, and then target identification. You're trying to match these two together, right? Stories help you do that. Reading Shakespeare, you learn about yourself, because what you do when you listen to a story is you become the characters in the story. And you, just like you visualize the items on the menu, right? What was it? Raisin caper sauce. That was like, I really tried that on, and it gave me these different emotions. If I am watching a horror movie, I put myself in the victim's shoes, maybe. And I try on what it would be like if some guy with an axe was trying to, chop my arm off or something. How would I deal with that? You're trying on different personas. You're taking on different world maps, right? This is the world where there's an axe murderer trying to kill you. And then the state of your physiology, right? All these different things to prepare you if that happens. It's almost like a little game, but the reason why we love doing that is because that's all we have to move through the world. And so, like, one difference is, like, one way you can think about it is like with mosquitoes, right? A mosquito hatches like 1 million eggs. And then they all fly out and do something different. Like, one flies in a window, one flies under a bus, one just flies out into the sky or something like that. And they all, like, 99% of them die. And then some of them live and those keep going. And then some of them had a great idea, or some of them got unlucky, right? Well, what do? We spin up different personas, right? This is just an internal representation. We don't actually know. And what does it mean to know? Like, what's going on in our bodies? We just have some internalized avatar, some perception of our bodies, some perception of the world, and we run scenarios in our brain. We can perform all these tasks through simulated modeling in abstract, right, in our imaginations. And then we try to predictively model out the consequences of those actions, and then if it ends up we're wrong, we predict wrong, then what do? We hopefully we update our maps. And so it's like the people that were the best storytellers, the ones who loved stories the most, were pretty much the ones that survived. Like you could say we've been evolved to tell stories, and so now we're this entire globe of people who love stories. Because stories tell us this is the world, this is us, this is our motivation moving through the world. These simulated models inform us of our maps and they orient us to the world. Stories sit at the center of our destiny. Your narratives, the narratives that you're following, that's your destiny. And we talked briefly about different levels of narratives, right? That the menu narrative is kind of a small one. It's like, if you can't get the swordfish frites, you will probably survive. Like that, you probably won't give it a second thought. But if you lose your job, or doctor calls you, sorry, you only have 30 days, whatever, these horrible scenarios, like those are those are high level narrative impairments. Narratives that under which multiple narratives live under. And so it's like the higher the narrative, the more encompassing your fate will be. Right? The more encompassing the prediction of your fate is. And then you think about, okay, well what's the highest narrative? What is the narrative that encompasses the most things? And then, right, it's predictive. So you could have a narrative that's not very well adaptive, right? It's like, I'm just going to make the most money possible. And as long as I make the most money possible, then that's going to be a fulfilling life. Like, you could try to do that. And we just know that it doesn't work. It's not even like I believe it or don't believe it. We just know it doesn't work. Some people still do it anyway, but... So that's a high narrative that's incorrect. It's a poor map. So what's the highest narrative that's the most accurate? What is the most rewarding? What is the highest, most rewarding? What is the highest, most adaptive narrative that we can that we can move through, that we can emulate, that we can follow? What is this path? And I think it's the hero's narrative, because this is the narrative that we keep coming back to. It's the one that grabs our attention the most, right? We have this value map, and whatever attracts our attention is how we, that's kind of what signals to us that maybe this is the thing that we need. And of course, we have to run all sorts of analysis to qualify it, right? To sharpen the signal, to test it and see, is this really going to do what I think it's going to do? And so, because it's been told by all these different cultures, I think the hero's narrative is our destiny. And now we know that the narrative itself sits at the center of our physiology, the center of who we are. And so now it's like, okay, well, what makes it the highest narrative? Okay, Steve, I'm with you. Maybe a narrative, okay, that's our destiny. I mean, technically I can kind of see what you're saying, that if a narrative is what predicts the action sequences that we enact, and also is indicative of the types of rewards that we're seeking, this is the thing that we use to identify the proper targets to fulfill the deepest desires, then I guess that's our destiny. Okay, technically you're right. Okay, I'll give you that. But why is the hero's narrative the highest narrative? Okay, so we'll answer that question on version 8, because I think I can probably put this into one lecture. But all right, guys, thanks so much for coming. We're going to talk about, hopefully next time you see this, we'll have incorporated why I think the hero's narrative is the highest narrative. All right.